about what we can do about some of those challenges and how we can help cope with that. So to start off, what is a pediatric psychologist? So pediatric psychologists like myself, we have training in general clinical child psychology. So this would be like what you would think a psychologist could do. So treating things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, those types of things. But a pediatric psychologist is different from a child psychologist in that we have specific training in working with children, young adults, and their families who have chronic medical conditions. And so that allows us to work kind of applying those clinical child psychology skills into the medical setting. There are lots of different ways that families can get connected with our service through that hospital setting. So one, a lot of times it's self-referral, right? As you all know, there's lots of stressful things that are associated with having a child with a chronic illness. And so recognizing that and asking for support when you need it is a big way that we get connected with families. We also have a lot of referrals from the medical team. So the medical team might notice this is a really challenging time. Would you like some extra support, and connect with our psychology team? And then we also meet a lot of families as kind of a standard of care. So for example, before all bone marrow transplants at Cincinnati Children's, we meet with families and do kind of an evaluation to see how we can be most supportive and help through that stressful process. There are a lot of different things that we can help with. So a big one is adjustment. As you all know, when you get a diagnosis or when you have a medical treatment starting, there's a lot of adjustment that comes with that, a lot of changes, a lot of stressors. And so just supporting through that process of adjusting to this kind of new situation that you're experiencing is a big part of what we do. We also work a lot with families on medication adherence. And what we mean by adherence is basically if the physician prescribes something, how close are you to meeting that kind of prescription? So, for example, who's had the experience of like you get prescribed a medicine and then one day you're like, I completely forgot to take that. I've had that experience for sure. Um, and the reason that we get specialized training in this is because it's so normal, right? Most people do struggle with medication adherence and adhering to all the complicated treatments that kids can have. And so helping support through that is a big part of what we do. Pain management is a big one. So with chronic illness, often comes pain, whether it's from the chronic illness itself or painful procedures. I heard you all talking about tests and pokes and things like that that are just not comfortable. And so physicians can prescribe, obviously, medications to help with pain, but pediatric psychologists have specialized training in how to address that pain without medication and using other strategies to help support pain. And then we can also see things that a regular psychologist might see. So just because a child has a chronic illness doesn't mean that their development stops, right? So it's normal for kids to have tantrums or not listen or be worried about things. And so I see some like nodding over there. And when that child has a chronic illness, those tantrums can have really different implications, right? And so figuring out how can we support around behavior or anxiety or mood as much as we can, with that special consideration for all the additional stressors that that child and family has. And then the last thing I want to specifically highlight is parent support. So one thing that we know is that kids with chronic illness, if they have one supportive person, adult, caregiver, parent, whatever it might be, then their outcomes down the line, their emotional well-being tends to be much better. What that means, though, is that it's great for the kiddos who have that supportive caregiver, but that caregiver or parent holds a lot of responsibility, and that can be really stressful. And so figuring out how can we support parents who are holding all of these responsibilities and having trouble seeing their kids go through this, how can we support parents through this so that they're in the best shape that they can be to care for their children? A couple of things I wanted to touch on just for this group in particular. As you all know, neutropenia is a rare disease. And with rare disease, there's often not a lot of research. And so when I'm doing clinical work with families, I'll often look to the research to see what's been helpful in this population, what are things that impact mental health specifically for this group of people. But with neutropenia, because it's a rare disease, there's less research on it, and specifically less research on the mental health of children with neutropenia. But luckily, we're able to pull from different disease groups who have kind of similar parts and pieces and apply that to families with neutropenia. So we pull from oncology or bone marrow transplant generally, or kind of needle phobia, any group that is more researched, just not specific to neutropenia, we're able to kind of pull information from. And I think the fact that neutropenia is such a rare disease and disorder is what makes today and this weekend so great, that you're all able to connect, especially with such a diverse group of people. So all of you have this common experience of being familiar with neutropenia in one way or another, but your lives are all very differently impacted. You might be different ages, your children might be different ages, you might be a parent or a spouse or someone else with neutropenia, right? And so having this diversity in the group is great, because not only can we have this shared common experience that you all can bond over and learn from each other with, but we can also learn from these different experiences, which kind of brings me to um, one of my first participation parts of the presentation. Um, I'm interested in hearing just from you all of what you're kind of looking for from the conference this weekend, um, hopes that you have, things you're wanting to take away. If you have been here before, what your favorite parts have been, or if you haven't, what you're most excited about. I'm just going to ask for some people to share if they feel comfortable, just kind of what they're hoping to get out of this weekend to help me kind of tailor my presentation a little bit. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I love that. That's such a huge challenge, right? And something that is hard for a lot of people to understand. Just finding that balance. That's great. Yeah.
I said earlier, my son does really well, but almost too well, because he had before walked into his room and seen 3 full syringes that didn't get used for 3 nights, and noticed a dry toothbrush that had, so I'm curious about, because we've resorted to yelling at him, at this age, when it started, once he was 13, we were done, so those, when that piqued my interest, that that's normal behavior, forget shots, that brush your teeth
Yeah.
and knowing they're important.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for kids with chronic illness that are taking a lot more medications and doing a lot more things than a typical kid their age. Super normal. So yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay. There are going to be other chances to participate later, so just prepare yourselves. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I want to jump into a little bit of just managing a chronic condition, common challenges that families experience. And then at the end, we're going to jump into kind of what can we do about it. And then I'll leave room for questions as well. But the first thing that I feel like is important for everyone to understand, providers, families, patients, is that we really approach patients from a family systems perspective. And so, what I mean by that is when a patient walks through the door, that first green circle there, we know that they're more than a diagnosis, right? When they walk through, they have a favorite video game, they have a best friend, they like pineapple on their pizza, right? They're more than just a diagnosis. And beyond that, they're more than just themselves, right? They're impacted by their family system around them, the greater culture, the greater community. So I think it would be naive of us as medical providers to think that children exist in a vacuum or a bubble, right? And it's super important to understand how all of these factors impact our children, our patient. Related to that, families are also impacted by that green bubble in the middle, right? So it goes both directions. Children are impacted by their families, and families are impacted by their children. Same goes for if you have a spouse with neutropenia, they're impacted by you and you're impacted by them. And so understanding this family approach is something that is really important. And when we think about a family approach, we tend to see that all members of the family unit tend to be impacted differently, by different experiences, right? So when we think of children, a lot of times what they're most impacted by are painful procedures, pokes, hospital stays, and kind of the memories of that and the experience of that. Also thinking about changes in appearance like hair loss or having lines or things like that. And then missing out on activities. I heard a lot of you earlier talking about living in a bubble, missing out on school, not being able to see friends. And these are really common things that kids will look back on or talk about as things that have impacted them. But for parents, we see that they're often more impacted by seeing their child in pain, whether that be physical pain or emotional pain. Um, the experience of getting that initial diagnosis, being told that your child has this diagnosis, and kind of processing that in the event of hearing that information. Uncertainty over time, right? You might have gotten that diagnosis. I heard a lot of you share of current uncertainty that you're still experiencing, and just sitting with that uncertainty, which humans don't really like to do. And then grief and loss, right? So there are different things that different family members can be impacted by. Uh-oh. Some other challenges that we tend to see commonly come up are the fact that neutropenia is a really rare diagnosis, right? As you've all kind of touched on. And so with a rare diagnosis comes a lot of questions, right? You get this diagnosis and you might think, what does neutropenia mean? That is a huge word and it has a lot of nouns in it. And what does it mean? What's the treatment? What are we going to do to my child? What's that prognosis long term? What's their life going to look like, right? And then I also heard a lot of you talk about the pathway to getting that diagnosis being really difficult, right? When you have a rare disease, you've seen a bunch of different doctors and gotten a lot of different opinions, right? And then you finally get that diagnosis, and it can be both a relief and also really overwhelming. And so that whole process of having that really unfamiliar diagnosis can be challenging. Related to the diagnosis being unfamiliar is the fact that not only is it unfamiliar to you, but it's unfamiliar to everyone around you, right, in the community. Has anyone had the experience of saying to someone new, like, my child has neutropenia, and they kind of look at you and they're like, what? Like, I don't really, yeah, for sure. And so with that, you're having to explain the diagnosis over and over again. You're having to explain what your day-to-day life looks like over and over again. You're having to kind of talk with family and friends, and it feels a little bit isolating because they don't really understand your situation. They don't understand everything that you're going through. And sometimes what having an unfamiliar diagnosis can lead to is because other people can't understand it, they might not take it seriously or fully understand like what it means to have this diagnosis, which can be really isolating and challenging. And then, as you all have kind of talked about too earlier, it's very helpful that I was able to hear people talking early because I can understand your experiences a little bit. But the course of neutropenia can be really variable, right? So, from one patient to the next, as you all have shared, everyone has a different experience, but also within one child, the experience can look really different from 1 month to the next, right? And like I mentioned earlier, sitting with that variable kind of course and that uncertainty of what's going to happen next is really uncomfortable. And what we know is that that uncertainty is kind of the underlying layer that is really challenging for humans, anyone to sit with. And when children have a chronic illness like neutropenia, that uncertainty is often much higher than in other families or children or people. And that's really stressful, right? And so family members cope with all of these challenges in a variety of ways. But I'm curious from you all, another chance for participation, so get ready. um, are some of these kind of consistent with you or your family's experience? I'm interested in hearing, these are just things that, we have noticed from research or clinical work and practice. But what are some things that I missed? Are there other challenges that you all have experienced that I didn't quite capture? Yeah.
Well, why did you
maybe emotional, like I feel like I fight for my son, and validation. You know, in my learning, I'm like, how dare we don't live in our life? We don't know what this human goes through. And I mean, I don't know, I'm sure all of you will hear in the same way. That kid never has a bad ever, not one time, they're finding, why do I have? Why? So is that judgment?
Mhm.
You know, and it goes back to, I'll build a tiny home, because I've been asked that question a lot. So what's gonna happen with you guys in the future? But I don't know, I have no clue
Mhm.
how cross-cultivation. Judgment.
Yeah, so it goes beyond just not understanding or your experience or perspective, but like the judgment that is placed on that because of that not understanding. Yeah, absolutely.
That I, you know, he thought that I'm going to tell us, really never will. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we need to have around coverage.
Yeah. Maybe even hearing you all talk earlier briefly about diet and things like that, like the uncertainty of even physicians like getting mixed recommendations, right? Of should I do this or should I do this? People told me two different things, right? Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Mhm. Sure, sure. And maybe it's like that extra mental labor too, the mental thinking of like having to do extra steps in your normal routine and in your day. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I have this is a little bit of an aside, but this theme of uncertainty I think is really common. And there's an interesting study. I'm a scientist, so I talk about research. It's exciting, I promise. Where humans, people, were participating in research, and they could either choose to like hold on to something that would deliver a shock to them, and they could choose to either definitely get the shock or maybe get the shock, right? Like a 50-50 chance that they were going to get it. And almost everyone chose to get the shock every time because the uncertainty of whether or not there was going to be a shock was so distressing to them, right? So people are choosing, I will definitely take the shock, the pain, right? Over not knowing whether I'm going to have pain or not. And that uncertainty, right? That's how humans work. That's so challenging to live with. And you all are living with that every day, right? The uncertainty of what does the future look like, and what are things that we can plan for or can't plan for. Yeah. Anyone else have any challenges they'd like to share? Yeah.
I give the answer that we don't really know. Like my son and I are really close. Everything, anytime something is going on here, and he has a question about education, some people will come to me. And sometimes there are things that I don't even have the answer, and I need to try to talk about the fact that, you know, that everything is okay.
Mhm.
And like when he had challenges, taking the shot, you know, it's not bad. Well, at the beginning, he used to have a lot of challenge in taking the shot, and he would cry a lot, and he would come to me, and he would tell me, like, Mommy, why do I have to do this? Why am I not just like the other kids? And that was really different to them. And I have to be there, but then I have to be strong, and I have to support them. I have to let them know that everything is okay. When I know them okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like that's relatable to a lot of people of like feeling like you need to be strong and in a position to provide comfort and support, but like who's going to comfort you and support you because you also don't know what's happening, right? I think that's a really nice segue into kind of this next phase of the conversation, which is what are things that are helpful, right? So I'm going to jump into things that we've found to be helpful, both for supporting parents and also supporting children. But I want to hear from you all first. As you're facing all of these challenges, are there things that you have found helpful? Yeah, go for it.
Like with him, when we have to be shocked or we have to do any doctor's appointment, we would do something that he like. We would buy him something that he liked. We would go and have lunch, something that he liked, to try to ease that feeling that he will feel better after the section. That is one of the things that help us a lot
Mhm.
to go through it. Like he has a whole collection of cards that we will buy one card every time he has a blood test.
Mhm.
So that way he is really thinking after that blood test to see what he's getting or what is the new one that he's getting for his body. That's something that we do try, and that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, whenever it's exciting, I need to get this particular color, so you're going to look at this particular color. Or I saw the release so original so there's not much focus on
Mhm.
blood tests, how the patient could be, and then we go for blood work and doesn't take about another day to try 2 or 3 places and nothing.
Mhm.
So we try to shift the focus away from the stress of the blood work, but it being something that we want to. And now we have 100 different. Difficult to find what we call them.
Yeah, yeah.
That the news crowd, I was in a mess, we couldn't know blood was for because he was supplying so much, it was a challenge, and he is talking, a whole chaplain in the hospital, he was asking me, why me, why I have to do this? It was really challenging, and for me, as a mother, he is really close with me. He will hold on to my clothes, and he don't want to do the job that he did, and I think, why? It's a bad feeling. It's like you don't know what to spend that. For me, it was like I was trying to calm him down, but he would ask me where the would stop, and I don't have that mindset.
Mhm.
For me, it's that choice once I'm tired. Anyway, something to the hospital, it's very expensive. Down. So yeah, anyway, me in there, just what? Yeah, for sure. So the rest of the factor, anyway, just. And they have 7 now, 8 adults, only the 3-year-old down. Like a what, clearing crossing one from. They are, we're trying to. Well, it's a kind of common that there, yeah. So it's like, are we making this do that first? Just, yeah, well, there's like, at some point.
So because we realize that having like a lot of people here try to control that would involve most like the result of America.
I mean, usually start with few, and then more come in, the more posts that happen. So it's always kind of, if you don't know what the balance is, action or.
I'll tell you what our trick was, have fine. Never let any, them bring somebody up from, a big deal. So you can try, bring somebody that we're something to use for, especially because all the other kids on the floor before, they really didn't know what they were doing, so I'm always like, no, pick you, that's the only person to do with it.
So what would we do for us is physical activity.
Mhm.
Feel like the part of the ground, find out what kind of creative or steps and sometimes steps or get up all Yeah, it's not they get a pathway to get funded, so it's a, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're all talking about a bunch of really great things. You're stealing my presentation from me. But speaking about like rewards, right? Reinforcers, distraction, advocacy by parents, all these different things that we can do to try to help our children feel better and help ourselves. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
But that's the stuff we work out, but it's also time to be.
Magic school bus. Yeah. Mhm.
I love that.
Mhm. No, that's great. Yeah. Social support. That's fantastic. Yeah.
You're right. It's yeah. Yeah, gotta be very transparent.
Mhm.
What it is. Not, your life is, not fun, and not gonna love it every day, but then together, that was, that's sort of helped guide her now. What challenge did you navigate is thousands, and then every day is a new one. I think, don't know what tomorrow's gonna bring, so. Then work through each day as a mountain, thank God. Good, but, and we always said, when's that hammer gonna fall? You know? Living like that every day.
Yeah. That validation, that taking things one step at a time. Again, stealing direct words from my presentation, but that's okay. We can move forward with it. I'm gonna jump. This is great, and I really appreciate this. Feel free to jump in at any point. We're gonna talk about some of those things, and then at the end, I just want to leave time for discussion and to hear more from you all because this is fantastic. Um, what can we do, right? You all have touched on so much of it. And I kind of break this part into what can we do for our children, and what can we do for ourselves, whether we're adult patients or parents or caregivers or spouses, and thinking about what are some ways that we can cope with this, right? Um, One of them is just considering differences in coping, right? So everyone copes differently. Everyone has different strategies that work for them. You might have different strategies than your child, than your partner, than someone in a similar situation from each other in this room today, right? And so recognizing that everyone copes differently, and that's okay. Let that be okay. And then also thinking about everyone's sharing these strategies, right? And it's kind of like, how can we build up our toolbox? And we're going to take that strategy that everyone's mentioned, we're going to put it in our toolbox, but we're going to use some tools more than others, right? You can't use a hammer for everything, right? If you need to screw something in, you can't use a hammer or it'll do something bad. I don't know that much about hardware, but it'll do something bad. And kind of thinking about, do I need to use a screwdriver? Do I need to use a hammer? I don't really use my wrench that often, but when I need it, it's there, you know? So thinking about these different tools, and everyone's going to use different ones for different situations. Focusing on the relationship, right? So I mentioned earlier that that relationship between parent and child can result in really good outcomes for the child, but it can also result in really good outcomes for you, right? Supporting that relationship, that strong relationship between yourself and your child or yourself and your partner can be really important. Relatedly, that social support piece, so relying on other people, right? People who have similar experiences, people who have different experiences, having that social support of someone you can go to vent or cry or do what you need to do, right? It's really hard when people offer to help sometimes because we feel like we should be able to do it all ourselves. but accepting help when you need it, accepting help when it's offered, and really relying on those social support networks that you all are talking about. And then being patient, taking it one day at a time, right? This process is a marathon, not a sprint, as you all know. And it can be really easy to look forward, right? It's natural to look forward and try to plan for the future. And that can be helpful at times, right? If we never planned what we were going to eat during the week, we might never eat. But it can be also really overwhelming, right? If you think too far forwards. And so if we're trying to think 1,000 steps ahead, we can miss what's right in front of us and we can feel really overwhelmed. And so thinking about, okay, how can we focus on taking things one day at a time? Sometimes it might be 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 10 seconds at a time, right? Whatever you need to do and whatever chunk of time feels reasonable, but trying to focus on kind of staying in the moment and not looking too far forwards if that's not helpful at that time. For our children, we like to think a lot about maintaining a routine or just trying to normalize things as much as possible. So, kids thrive on routine, as I'm sure you all know. So, if we can incorporate taking medicine into our routine, it can help with behavior, it can help with taking medicine, it can help with setting those clear expectations, it can help with our kids' mood if we're setting like a structured schedule routine. So having that normal routine as much as possible is really important. And I say that recognizing that when you're in the hospital for a long stretch of time, that routine is going to look really different than it normally would, right? And so in the hospital, maybe routine is just I change out of my pajamas in the morning and I put on my pajamas at night, right? We can break this down to have really small pieces that still give us some kind of structure and routine as much as we're able to. Related to that is kind of maintaining these normal expectations for behavior. It is really easy when a kid is not feeling well or when they're sick to want to do things that are going to make them feel better, right? And if they want to get, a cookie cake for dinner, that's going to make them feel better. If they get that cookie cake, right? They're going to be happy about it. But we know that that's not normally what we would allow our children to do. But if we do that, if we give in to them, if we start kind of letting them do whatever they want, that inadvertently sends the message, right, from us that, whoa, something must be really wrong because our rules just went out the window, right? And kids listen to adults' behavior, right? They notice. They're going to notice if your expectations and your rules change, and they're going to wonder why. And that message is, well, it must be because something's really bad, right? But like I said, kids thrive on expectations, rules, routine, structure. And so having that structure and maintaining that structure, instead of sending the this is really bad message, what it actually does is send the message that things are under control. The world's not falling down, even if it feels like it does. And I trust you to do this, right? I believe that you can still follow these rules and follow these expectations. And it sets them up for the success moving forward too. And then emphasizing mastery and control. So when kids have chronic illness, they're often don't have a lot of control over a lot of things, right? Speaking about, we don't want to go to the hospital, and that makes total sense, right? Not a lot of people do. So trying to give them control where they can, right? What arm would you like to be poked in? Do you want to take the blue pill before you take the white one? Trying to figure out like what are some ways that we can give them little bits of control. And then emphasizing mastery of you've gotten so good at sitting still during your pokes, or you've done an amazing job checking off when you take your medications, right? Helping them build skills and mastery and just providing a lot of praise for that can be really helpful. And I think what this does, providing like talking about mastery and control, it's kind of speaking to that validation piece of we don't have to pretend like this is the best thing that's ever happened to our family, right? Because that's not realistic. And kids know that, right? Especially as they get older. And so thinking about, yeah, this kind of stinks. Like, I'm really not happy that we have to do this either. But here's how we can control it. Here's how we can work towards building mastery in these different things. There's one particular strategy that I want to kind of hone in on a little bit, and it's related to kind of values, right? So when chronic illness is happening, it can feel like it can take over, right? And it takes the forefront of everything that every day is about, right? And sometimes that's what needs to happen, right? But a lot of times it stays that way, which can be really hard and challenging to deal with. And so, one of the things that we know can really help families is kind of refocusing on what's important to you. What are things that you value? What are things that are important to you in your life? And how can we identify those core values and then move to live kind of in alignment with them, right? So, we're going to do a little exercise. Everyone has different things that are important to them. But we're going to do this little exercise to kind of explore each other's values a little bit. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. I hope everyone can see on the slides, but I think you have like a piece of paper in front of you. So if you could pull out a piece of paper and a pen or your phone or something else if you don't have it. But what we're going to do, and I can read these off for you because it's a little small, is we're going to go through each box and we're going to think about what are things within each box that are really important to us. So, for example, in the top left, it says parenting, right? So, we're going to write down like, what are some things that are important to us as a parent? What are things we value as a parent? What are things we value for personal growth or leisure, right? And we're going to kind of start there. So, we have parenting, personal growth, leisure, spirituality, health, work, community and environment, family relationships, intimate relationships, and social relationships. And so just jotting down a couple things in each category, or thinking about a few things in each category that are important to you and that you value. And if anyone needs me to reread the categories again, I can do that. Do about one more minute and then we'll jump to the next part of the exercise. Okay, I'm gonna jump to the next part, but people can keep writing if they would like. So the next part is, this says in the upper box, but however you wrote it down for each category, I want you to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 how important those values are to you, right? So 0 would be it's not really that important to me, not something that's a top priority. And 10 would be this is extremely important to me. So we'll go through and do that for each category. After you finish that, I want you to write a second number next to the first. And this time you're going to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 how effectively you're living that value right now. Are your actions mapping on to how important that value is to you? So 0 would be, no, I'm really not doing anything to help support this value. And 10 would be, I feel like I'm doing a really good job at living that value. We'll do maybe one more minute and then another chance for participation. I know everyone's really excited about that. So just prepare yourself. Okay. So, as we were going through this exercise and thinking about what are things that we value, how important are those things to us, and how closely are we living in alignment with that, I'm curious if you all noticed anything about the values you found or what was important or not important. Um, was anything surprising? Are there areas you want to give more attention to? And then thinking about, is there one thing that you can do today to kind of move you closer to where you want to be? So, any of these things, you could feel free to share what other people's experiences were.
Spending way too much time on work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a, so that value, like, yeah. So we're valuing time with family maybe more than we value work, but we're spending more time at work than we are with family, right? There's that imbalance. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And then I think what so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I value ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we're not doing.
Yeah.
I'm guilty.
Yeah.
So. Those way, you always put yourself last and because they would find the way you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone have one thing that they would like to share that they can do to move themselves closer to something they value today? So, if you value self care, if you value time with family, if you value time for yourself, what's one thing you could do today to just move you a little bit closer to that? Yeah, sure. That's an option. Yeah, no, that's great. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hope this first, but I know without the work, I can't.
Right.
put it first.
Sure. So maybe it's not about the amount of time, it's the quality of the time. Yeah.
Like, and those are the use of what we have. And it's overall less. But when you like think about all the things you saw, yeah, like okay, great. never get up. So it's a sacrifice on one hand, but to me personally, I but then realize that then I quickly explore things to impact.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing. We have time for one more, I think.
And I started crying because I realized I didn't pay attention very often in the playground. And I know someone never can play and their kid or playground. So yeah, church every
Mhm.
all the time. Why am I that for your kid? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay. I just have a couple more things to go through. I know we're running a little bit over time. When we think about taking care of yourself, right? Those values, activities that we just did, and just drawing attention to what are things that are important to us. How can we live those fully? Just attending to that is one step in the right direction, right? So doing this exercise is a thing that you've done today to move you closer to where you want to be. But this is something you can continue to check in with, right? So do this exercise with your partner, with your kids, with, whoever, yourself, and just kind of intermittently check in and see, where am I with things that are important to me and how are things going. Some other kind of more like concrete takeaways or things. One is engaging in self-care activities. And I think that uh, that sounds really cliche coming from a psychologist to like engage in self-care, but it really is important to take care of ourselves so we can take care of our kids. And so recognizing that self-care is going to look different at different stages of life, right? If you are super busy, if the medical things, the illness things, the neutropenia things are right at the forefront, we have to figure out, how can we make self-care fit into that? And so maybe it's just walking outside into the hallway for 30 seconds and like taking a deep breath, and that's your self-care for the day. Or maybe your self-care is, I ate a granola bar today, and it's self-care because yesterday I didn't eat anything, right? Or I washed my face for 30 seconds, right? So thinking of self-care, not necessarily as going to a spa or getting a pedicure, right? Things like that. Those can be self-care too, but that's not always realistic. So thinking about small acts of self-care and how we can make that happen. Developing identities outside of work or your role as a caregiver, right? So are you a reader? Are you a runner? Are you a friend, right? Thinking about, how can we expand what we're doing so that we are tapping into different parts of ourselves and our identity. Um, Social support. So seeking and accepting help from peers, which we've talked about a little bit, relying on support from family, friends, and other people who are willing to help. Talk about it, write about it, get the feelings out. Another thing that sounds cliche coming from a psychologist, but I promise it helps. And if you don't have, a person that you feel like will understand or that you can talk to, writing about it is a great option. Or even just like talking to yourself in the car, getting those feelings out and saying them out loud can be really scary, but it can really help things. Because when we push them down, they don't go away. They stay there until they come out somehow, right? And then professional support. So if you feel like things are overwhelming and you could use someone to help coach you through, how can we use these coping strategies? How can we do these things either for yourself or for your child? Seeking help from a psychologist or a therapist or someone who can help coach through that, I think, is a really important thing to be open to doing. Yeah. That is an excellent question. Um, and I think it's different for everyone, right? The question was, how do you get your child to get professional help, right? So if they don't want it, right? Right. I think the important thing is that we can't really force it, right? So especially, I'm not sure how old your child is, but especially as they get older, we can't force them to do really anything. You used to be able to pick them up and put them in the car and take them places, and you can't do that as they get older and bigger and stronger and start to have opinions and things like that, which is a beautiful thing. But But I think if they don't want to do it, we can't force them to, but we can model for them that it's okay to get help. We can model for them that it's okay to talk about our emotions and our feelings. So we can do it ourselves. We can point to people who do it. We can normalize it. Um, I think another thing is finding the right fit, right? So when you talk about a therapist or a psychologist, not everyone is going to click with every person, right? So finding the right fit, I think, can be really important. But that's a great question. The last thing on here is specifically geared towards children, but I find it helpful for myself sometimes when I'm in the need of a coping skill or strategy. I think sometimes when we're in that high stress situation, we can think, I literally can't think of anything. I can't think of anything to do that will make me feel better. And so this is just a coping skills checklist. There's 3 boxes on this slide and 2 on the next, all filled with different coping skills. So the way that this works is you go through and you can check off or circle or whatever you want to do, the ones that you already do. Circle the ones you want to try and cross out the ones that you don't think will be helpful, right? But this list just has a lot of creative ways that we can try to engage our kids in coping skills, engage ourselves in coping skills, and it highlights things that we might not have even thought about as a coping skill and helps kind of put it front and center. Here's the next slide. I saw people taking pictures, so if you need me to go back, I can. I think we can get the slides to you. Yes? Okay, yes. We can get the slides to you for sure. Yeah. But yeah, that is all I have. But if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy speaking to this group and hearing from all of you and your experiences. So thank you. Thanks. Okay, so our next session is about